I have been doing a lot of research lately on different cameras, trying to figure out what camera I personally am going to get, and I've pretty much figured out that there's no bad cameras in 2024. All you need to do Brady Bourne here, aka the iPhone Filmmaker, and I want to let you in on a secret. The camera in your pocket is good enough. If you're having a hard time getting good shots, the problem isn't the camera, it's your lack of knowledge of the camera. Master the camera you have, and you'll be able to get great stuff. The first problem is that you're treating your phone like a phone. And I know that sounds weird, but you're probably treating your phone like a phone, not a camera. If you're trying to use your phone for your camera, you gotta treat it like one. First thing you should do to start that is hold it the right way. And I mean horizontally, not vertically. Vertical's okay for photography, I still take photography shots, but what needs to happen is you need to have a mental shift in your thinking of what your camera is. If you're holding your phone vertically while taking videos, photos, I don't care, it's going to be much harder to make that mental shift because you're holding your phone the way you always hold your phone. Holding your phone horizontally is the first step to getting great shots. Next, lower the camera. If you're holding your phone up really high, like everyone else does when they're taking photos, your stuff isn't gonna look any different. You need to lower the camera. This is one way that you can actually make your stuff even more cinematic. I know a lot of cinematographers, I personally am a cinematographer, but one of the cinematographers I was talking to said that he personally never brings the camera above his waist, unless it's for very specific reasons, which we're gonna talk about in later videos. Another problem with holding your phone up high is that you're reducing the amount of depth in your image. Sometimes lowering the camera is literally the difference between a not great shot or like an okay shot to a fantastic one. Moving on, you gotta know your camera. What are its strengths and weaknesses? And I think this goes for any camera. When I've rented cameras or used cameras that aren't mine, I usually try to spend 2 to 3 days with it before my shoot. That way I can learn it, set up presets, get to know it, and practice with it, because you cannot get the most out of your camera if you don't understand it and don't know it well. So the strengths and weaknesses of the iPhone, I would say the strengths would be stabilization. This is something that's massive. There is no camera with better internal stabilization than the iPhone. It's probably one of the biggest advantages to using an iPhone. I have a smartphone gimbal, but I don't use it that often because the internal stabilization is that good. Also, its small size and, just the convenience of having the camera in your pocket. It's so much faster than any other camera. iPhone's also great for vlogging. Wide shots is definitely one of its strengths. The weaknesses would be the small sensor, the fact that you're getting less detail and less depth of field. You have a fixed aperture, which is annoying. It doesn't do great in low light. The lens flares, I don't know if there's one right now, but when I was testing this out, the lamp back there was casting some sort of weird glow right around here. I don't know if it's still doing it, but you can get these weird annoying flares with iPhone, and that's just something that you have to kind of work around. And then also the fact that iPhone over sharpens. I haven't noticed it a ton in my stuff, but every once in a while there's a shot where I'm like, man, what happened there? And now if you have an iPhone 13 or later, you have the ability to shoot ProRes with that, which massive file sizes, but you won't have the over sharpening problem. Now, I have gotten around a lot of those weaknesses, and I'll be making videos about how I go about doing that to really get the most out of your camera, but I wouldn't have been able to get around any of those if I didn't know my camera well. And that just goes to me using this thing for years now and just shooting everything with a phone, and I have pushed it well past its limits at this point, much farther than I think anyone probably thinks you could take an iPhone. On to tip number, I didn't actually number the tips, so I have no idea what number it is, but it is be in control. Now, I'm not necessarily talking about having a third-party camera app. Those can be helpful in some situations. Right now, I'm filming on the Blackmagic camera app, which I recommend if you're serious. But for a lot of the stuff I shoot, I just use the native camera app because it's faster and more convenient. But the basics are that you have resolution and frame rate up in the corner there, so make sure you're using 4K at 24 frames per second. 4K is needed because of the smaller sensor. 1080 looks kind of bad. 4K looks fantastic in my opinion, and I would always recommend using 24 frames per second over 30 or 60. You're going to save storage space, and then I would only go up to 30 or 60 if you're needing that for slow motion purposes, which is less often. And then I've noticed that iPhone will overexpose its shots by default. So if you just tap the screen and drag down on that little slider, you can kind of compensate for that to fix that and bring the highlights down. And then if you accidentally make it a little bit too dark, you can always pull that up in post and it won't be too big of a deal. But a lot of times you can lose the detail in the highlights. So just drag down that little slider and you should avoid that problem. And then if you tap and hold, it'll lock your settings in so that they're not changing while you're filming. And that's big because you don't want the light changing when you pan the camera one direction or the other. And I forgot to mention this a second ago. If you go to the settings app, you can actually set some default things. So you can set your default to 4K, 24 if you're going to be doing a lot of, video that you want to be cinematic. All right, this is a big one. You can't throw the basics out of the window. The fact that it's a phone doesn't change the need for good composition and camera movements. Once again, go to your settings and enable the grid so that you can see the rule of thirds. I recommend, especially if you're starting out, enable that grid so that you can keep that in mind while you're shooting because it's easy to forget those kind of things. And if you would like me to make a full video on different composition techniques, just let me know in the comments below. Now, because of the next level internal stabilization on iPhone, movements are easier than ever. If you want me to make a full video on different movements for iPhone, I would be happy to do that. Let me know in the comments as well. But some basics would just be push-ins, pull-outs, orbits, jibs if you're, a 6'6" person like me. I've faked drone footage before, which I don't even really know how, but a bunch of people think I was using a drone. I'm like, no, that was just me walking and holding the camera above my head. That goes back to the point of using high angles only for very specific reasons. But anyway, basically anything other than standing still. Just make sure that when you're using movements, you're drawing attention to your subject of the frame. If, for example, I had some sort of movement going on here that was, pushing over to the corner of the screen that's out of focus, then you'd be kind of confused because that's not the subject. I'm the subject. So if I had a push in coming in towards me, that makes sense. So just make sure that your movements are drawing the attention to the subject. On to probably the most overlooked aspect of filmmaking, lighting. It can be the difference between a good shot and a bad shot. And it's definitely the difference between cinematic and not cinematic. When I say lighting, I'm not saying that you need to have 1,000 lights on. More light is almost never the answer. Taking away light is what makes it look good. But the most basic thing you can do when working with natural sunlight outside is just make sure that the sun, no matter where it is in the sky, is behind your subject. And if you're inside, turn off any lights that are inside the house and only have natural window light. This is actually going to improve the colors of your image because you're not going to have the sun color temperature coming from outside with whatever color temperature the light bulbs in your house happen to be. I mean, unless you have actual lighting gear like I have right here, but most of you probably don't, and that's okay. I used natural light for the longest time and was still able to make great stuff. You just got to understand where to have the light. Another big thing is learning how to create depth. Because of iPhone's smaller sensor, you're going to get less depth of field straight out of camera, which is most of the time not a bad thing if you know what you're doing. You can get around that, and I personally prefer less depth of field for reasons that maybe I can discuss in a different video, but you still need to separate your subject from the background. Right now, I'm way up here, I have a light here. The background is dark with a couple lights, to create some interest, but I'm separated from the background. I push myself pretty much as far into this corner as possible of this room to give physical space, physical separation between me and the background. Probably the most important tip, use what you have. You don't need the latest and greatest iPhone 15 Pro Max. And guess what I'm shooting with right now? A 12 Pro Max. That's still a great camera, but that's the point. It's still a great camera. If you have a 7, guess what? You can make great stuff too. I've literally seen photos from iPhone 6, iPhone 7, and they looked great. It's because they understood photography and videography enough to be able to capture a great image with any camera. And I'm creating these videos because there's unique challenges that come when using iPhone cameras that you just don't have to deal with other cameras. And just to help you learn your camera so that you can get the most out of it. But I just told you a bunch of ways that you can get started using the camera that you already have in your pocket, or rather in your hands watching this video right now. No fancy camera is needed. Don't let your gear limit you. The skills you have are going to make a much bigger difference than the camera you have, especially early on when you're just starting. If you found this video helpful, please give it a like, and I will see you in this video right over here. And always, make it epic.